Good morning, my name is Madison Sturgeon, and today I'm going to be discussing the greater implementation of sign language in American schools. Since the 1700s and for centuries, there's been more awareness of the deaf community. The ways they interacted and communicated amongst each other planted the seeds for what is now today's vibrant deaf culture. They began to come together when the first School for Deaf was created. There was approximately 600,000 people in the United States that are deaf. This portion of the population has their own way to communicate amongst each other. American Sign Language, ASL, is a common language used by deaf people. ASL is a complete and organized language that uses facial expressions along with motions and movement of the hands. This leads to a connection to the stimulus material. The source of namesake clearly describes a boy named Gogol who does not have an American name. This tends to be considered a weird name. He hates that his name is both absurd and obscure. He isn't ashamed of his name, he's just tired of feeling like it doesn't necessarily fit in. This can resemble the same way a member of the deaf community would feel at their school where no one understood ASL or their language. Not only that, but at an adolescent's age, it is known that it can be a challenge when trying to balance being yourself along with fitting in with social groups. One's identity tends to easily coincide with the desire to find belonging in these. Another source from the stimulus material explains how, with testing, not only do adolescents find the need to conform to social influences, but they also find the need to conform to their peers' and parents' attitudes towards constructive rather than unconstructive behaviors. Children who are deaf could experience the need to conform and fit in due to the fact that they do not speak the same language as their peers and/or parents. With more people having the greater knowledge of ASL, one could create constructive behaviors for these individuals to conform to. When considering the general population, there's overall a lack in understanding of sign language. This proposes the question, to what extent would the greater implementation of sign language in American schools positively impact the deaf community? Further research prompted my argument that American Sign Language should be a more common language among society. If public schools were to offer sign language as a foreign language in schools, it would increase the amount of students who have an understanding of it. A first step that was taken was including the deaf community into public schools. In 1975, a law was passed allowing disabled children to attend public education. This legislation started the mainstreaming of what is now today allowing deaf children to attend public schools. Now schools that were strictly oral were being exposed to children who were signing. This made the deaf community now feel included and a part of society, being positively exposed to these others' day-to-day lifestyles. This obviously benefited the deaf community, but it was only a step. It didn't completely solve the problem. While hearing impaired children were now being included into society, the overall goal is still moreover for them to feel like they fit in. Meaning, even if they are now integrated into hearing schools and able to participate in their same environment, they still are not necessarily assimilated with their peers solely because they cannot understand the same language. The next big step that should be taken to solve this problem is offering ASL classes as foreign language in American schools. Rebecca at the University of Mississippi states, another main reason for communication difficulties is the difference in understanding information. For the vast majority of people, auditory information is key to communication. However, this is precisely what is inaccessible to a deaf person. This doesn't only include spoken words, but also includes different sounds, tones of voice, and speed, which is why there's a gap between these two communities. Having ASL as a foreign language taught in schools would help in closing this gap. According to the chart above, out of 373 people that previously interacted with a deaf person, the most common relationship is a family member. This shows how there is a barrier between these two communities, and most of the time it is only brought together when it's a family situation. If we mandate that ASL is taught at an early age throughout schools, we can unite those two worlds and possibly aid in closing this intangible distance. Teaching ASL to children who are deaf and Teaching ASL to children while they're young is the best option, especially since it's easier for young children to pick up on a language that isn't native to theirs. Communication is not a gift automatically given, but with some time and dedication, it can be gained. While providing these classes that teach students ASL would help people who have hearing impairment feel like they fit in, some say that the presence of a distinct deaf community would be problematic. They feel that sign language is just like a minor group and doesn't meet the requirements to be anything more, which is why ASL also wouldn't meet the requirements to be taught as a language in schools. Another argument against ASL in schools is that the deaf community has no cultural traditions. According to Wilcox and Wilbers, when compared to all spoken foreign languages offered in schools, ASL does not carry the same rich body and artistic works as other languages. Since there is not a written form of American Sign Language, education and government officials argue that the deaf community is not suitable to have literary and artistic works nor hold cultural traditions. Also, in order to include these classes in public learning, there is need for interpreters, and hiring those interpreters or teachers would be an expense. The possible limitations regarding the implementation of sign language in American schools are obscured when compared to the benefits that they would have on the deaf community. Learning the language at an early age would spread the knowledge and understanding of ASL. If more people know American Sign Language, then we can help in closing these barriers between the two communities and help make ones who are hearing impaired feel like they fit into society.
All right, jump to your works cited. Okay, 2 questions for you. So my first question is, how were you able to include differing perspectives in order to reach your conclusion?
Okay, to reach my conclusion, I included perspectives of members of the deaf community along with their peers and parents who are able to hear. I did this by, first I talked about how members of the deaf community were affected by social influences and how they felt the need to fit into society. And then I tied this into how members in the hearing community and their peers and parents who are able to hear would make them feel, so, and how there was a barrier between these two communities. And with that, I was able to show how the peers and parents could then adjust what they are doing to help the members of the deaf community feel more included.
Okay.
Attention teachers, students, please pardon the interruption. It's just a reminder, students, that at the bell at 9:25, if you have a lunch, you need to report directly
What
to the
additional
cafeteria.
questions
lunch
emerged
only.
from your research?
You need to report directly to the
From my
cafeteria
research,
at
I was
9:25
able
at the bell.
to
Do not
discover
report to
that
your fourth period
offering
class
sign language as
first.
a foreign language in schools would
Only
benefit the deaf
A-lunch students.
community and help them feel more included. With this, I got the questions of why isn't this a thing? Well, how come that we are not offering foreign classes, sign language as a foreign class? And then it also proposed the question of how come Spanish or French is a more common language and more offered frequently than this language. And this is important because if we can figure out why Spanish or French or other classes are offered more and sign language isn't, we can solve the problem and try to offer sign language more frequently.
All righty. You guys are done.